There's a fine line between passionate and obsessive. If you're like me, there's a chance you indulge in hobbies or interests to the point where it seems like it's altogether a bit too much. Maybe, even, you get to a point where you've committed more time than you had thought you were capable of, drawing something you love over and over again until suddenly you don't enjoy drawing it anymore. Fortunately, I don't know what that feels like. I just spent an entire month drawing prehistoric animals, and honestly, I still want to draw more. We're back, everyone. Welcome to Subjectively. My name is Jack, and this is the end of Whoops. And this is the end of Maysozoic 2024. Wait, hang on, the end? But I just got here. You're right, that's confusing. Maybe we should start at the beginning. May 1st, 2024. I uploaded this piece of artwork to my Instagram and to this YouTube channel's community page. A drawing of Caprasukis, and the first of what would be 31 illustrations of prehistoric animals for a challenge that I called Maysozoic. If you're familiar with our channel, you're well aware of challenges such as these, an entire month of drawing where artists follow along with a prompt list to create a new piece of artwork every day for a month, usually adhering to some kind of theme or genre of illustration. Other such challenges include Smaugust, a month of dragons, D&December with its dice-rolling randomness, and Apoctober, a challenge month that I came up with myself and the origin of the Enigmorph series and the world of Apocryphal. Another popular drawing challenge like these is Mermay, and for the past 3 years I had participated in this celebration of undersea artistry during the month of May, the last 2 of which were spent building upon the world of Apocryphal. This year I wanted to do something different, though I do still love that challenge and look forward to doing it again next year. After the success of our That's Not How You Draw Dinosaurs video, and the renewal of my interest in paleontology that came along with it, I decided I wanted to spend more time in the realm of paleo art, shaking off the rust and relearning a lot of things I thought I knew about the science and artistry behind this genre. So, on May 1st, 2024, I started Maysozoic, and set to work creating 31 illustrations of 31 different prehistoric animals. There's a lot one can learn from committing to a challenge like this. Art is not just a pastime or a stress release, though it can be and is for some. It's a discipline, something that requires hard work and dedication to get better at. And as in all disciplines, repetition is the key to mastery. Imposing so strict a regiment as an illustration a day for a whole month will inevitably teach you something about yourself and your craft. For example, one of the things I learned about my personal approach to making paleo art in particular is how I view the genre and what kind of work I like to make within its boundaries. Science is all about unraveling the mysteries of our world, learning what is or isn't possible, what did or didn't exist. Art is about exploring all of those routes that science has disproved, turning the hypothetical into reality and reveling in human imagination. We'll be dancing the line with my illustrations, but always erring on the side of the artistic. This is an art channel, after all. If you haven't seen my video about paleo art, watching that first might help you understand my perspective of this project a little bit more. If you have, then I can whip out this Venn diagram to help you convey where on the spectrum of paleo art my illustrations will be falling. Somewhere in between scientific and entertainment seems appropriate to me. My goal with this project was to educate myself a little bit about the intricacies of extinct animal anatomy to further my abilities to create dimensional but fantastical creatures. Things like dragons, aliens, and other fictional beasties can be informed by real animals and how they actually function. This is to say that I will often take artistic liberties with my illustrations, replacing scientifically accurate features with ones that I find more visually appealing. Primarily, colors and textures will be more than just a little unrealistic. This is intentional. I promise I don't actually think that Sauropelta had crystal spines coming out of its back. However, if paleontology is your passion or your profession, please feel free to supplement my less than adequate information about these species down in the comments for people who are interested in the science side of this process as much or more than the artistic side. Aside from what I discovered about myself, there were a lot of other things I learned during this month too. Firstly, on the artistic side of things, I got a good education in painting textures. Patterns and textures can be painted in rather than drawn in with lines. When working with real-life references like photos of birds or reptiles, I'm sometimes tempted to draw in every single scale or feather and whisker. However, you can save a lot of time and create more believable three-dimensional forms by painting in those textures instead of drawing them into your sketch. This, of course, is where good brushes become very important. I used to only use Procreate default flat brush when painting color, but having a good variety in opacity, texture, width, tapering, and blender is really important. Now I use brushes from our Subjectively brush packs, a series of digital paintbrushes designed by my wife, Claire, that have upped my illustration game tenfold. Claire was trained as a traditional painter, and her knowledge of how brushes work in real life has informed not only her digital illustration style, but the brushes she designed and works with. The dry oil on board from our oil paint set is fantastic for layering colors to create natural-looking gradients. The textured wash on low opacity can create subtle shifts in hues, which is great when painting scales and skin. The round brush from our sketch pack is really nice for line work and even sketching, and that's my personal choice for my underdrawings. We have a bunch of brushes for you to use in Photoshop and Procreate for sale digitally on our Gumroad. The link is in the description. It's a great way to support us and a great way to take your own illustration skills up a notch. Let's see, what else did I learn this month other than how to shamelessly self-promote our own products in our videos? Oh, yes. Doing studies of other artists' paleoart combined with referencing living animals really helps when it comes to understanding complex animal anatomy. When it comes to creating believable yet impossible fictional creatures, the more you understand about real animals, the better. You can reference real animal patterns and swap out realistic colors for impossible and saturated palettes to create something that looks visually pleasing and fantastical. Nature does a really good job at coming up with interesting and exciting visual designs for animals. Use that to your advantage when creating fictional creatures. On that same note, it's also really fun to completely make things up, like crystal osteoderms or glowing red eyes. While we're talking about colors, remember that when you're making an animal entirely white, keep in mind that nothing is pure white. Nothing besides for direct light sources. White things, especially white animals, have a ton of hues that make up their white bodies. Reference real albino specimens to get an idea of where and how much color to actually add. Same thing goes for all black animals. There are so many hues that arise as the light hits their furs or scales or skin. Unless you're drawing a shadow demon, it's not going to be entirely black. Another thing to keep in mind, big animals are wrinkly. This is a good thing to remember when creating fantasy or sci-fi creatures like dragons or kaijus. A lot of skin means a lot of places where it folds, overlaps, and pinches. To convey an animal's scale, whether it's real or fantastical, try to drape its skin over its powerful muscles, almost like clothing. Reference real living animals like elephants or crocodiles to get a good idea of how this works in real life. Now, when it comes to these month-long daily drawing challenges, I try to find ways to lessen the amount of work that I have to do for each piece. The more of these challenges I do, the more I understand my limits. For this month, I thought that drawing each animal in profile would mean half as much work for every day, right? I did this with my Smoggest challenge a few years ago. However, some animals were harder to draw in profile than others. Arion, for example, is almost never depicted from the side, always from the top because, its carapace looks so cool. It was very hard to find a good reference for this decapod in the pose that I drew it in, and it ended up being a little bit more work than it could have been if I had just drawn it from a top-down angle instead. It also meant that some animals appeared a little bit more compressed in the small, square canvas that I limited myself to. Longer animals needed to be posed in somewhat uncomfortable ways so that they would fit, or else end up looking smaller than they actually were, like Aegisuchus next to Beelzebufo. I wanted to stick with the pattern I had established with my other animals though, so I toughed it out for the sake of consistency. This was a creative decision on my part, but it certainly doesn't apply to everyone. I saw a lot of artists that used different sized canvases for each illustration of their challenge, and it turned out great. Another important thing to remember with art, and especially with challenges like this, is that you're going to have a lot of ups and downs. You start off with a high, but as the days go on, it's easy to lose steam. At a certain point, some of the new tricks you learn become less of a conscious decision and more automatic. This can bring the quality of your work down, and it's inevitable that a few of your pieces will end up being ones that you don't like. I started feeling unhappy with my illustrations around the 12-day mark with my Argentinosaurus piece. It's a shame because I really like that dinosaur, but a combination of a rushed schedule, a lack of strong references, and a stubbornness to spend a little bit more time with the piece resulted in what is probably my least favorite illustration from the month. When you get to a point like this, try to identify the factors that are contributing to your frustration with your work. As I previously mentioned, a lack of proper time management was the key issue with my Argentinosaurus. I was traveling for the weekend, and I ended up rushing through a lot of the steps that I took with my other illustrations that I liked a lot more. But once I singled out those shortcomings, I was able to be aware of them the next time I found myself in a similar situation, and make sure I didn't end up with another piece I didn't like. Sure enough, I liked every subsequent illustration from day 12 on significantly more than I did Argentinosaurus. It's also important to remember that just because you, the artist, may not be happy with a piece, doesn't mean that no one will like it. Share your work anyway, so as not to disrupt the momentum that you've built up thus far. It'll help you stay on track so you don't completely abandon all hope of ever finishing the project. Towards the end of the month, I started having more fun with the prompts. That is, taking more creative liberties. I had gotten so used to drawing certain aspects of anatomy that I was able to divert more from the reference images I was using and create things more of my own make, albeit slightly less scientifically accurate. That said, I relearned a lot about dinosaur anatomy that I thought I had already understood. When I was younger, I used to draw dinosaurs or dinosaur-like creatures a lot. However, I usually referenced artwork of the animals that stylized them in exciting but scientifically inaccurate ways. My biggest source of inspiration was the concept art book for Peter Jackson's King Kong film. There's nothing wrong with taking such artistic liberties, but understanding how the animals actually existed in life allows me to take a more informed approach when I design fantasy creatures of my own. Things like pterosaur wings, incredibly unique adaptations unlike any living animal today, or the lips of carnivorous animals like theropods are features often overlooked and oversimplified in stylized depictions of such animals. This isn't to say that one way of drawing these kinds of creatures is better than the other, but the more you know and understand about the subject, the more dimensional your work will be. And while we're on the topic of paleontology, let's go down the list and take a look at all of the things I learned on the scientific end of the spectrum. When I first learned about Caprasuchus, I thought it had stood up off the ground at all times, living an entirely terrestrial life and galloping around like a dog. At the time of this illustration being made, however, it turns out that theory has been disproven. Devastating. Once, a paleontologist thought that they had discovered a fossil of Bulgaria with embryos developing inside of it, but this was later dismissed and instead discovered that those embryos were actually just fish it had eaten. Whoops. Sauropelta was originally going to be called Peltosaurus, but then they found out someone else had already given that name to some stupid lizard, I don't know. The name Cryodraken could be interpreted in English as simply cool dragon. How's that for a name? Also, the nerds who named this thing wanted to name it after Game of Thrones. Originally, the armor plates on Saltosaurus were thought to have belonged to an ankylosaur. Understandable, but it is pretty cool that this guy gets the best of both worlds when it comes to ankylosaurs and sauropods. Nearly complete Dinochirus fossils were found in 2013, but the skulls had been looted and sold on the black market along with a few other parts of the skeletons. They were eventually recovered. Now, I know it's not a nice thing to do, but being a fossil thief sounds like an awesome profession. The group of animals that Hybotus belongs to is considered a wastebasket taxon, basically a name scientists give to animals that don't quite fit in with any others. It also means that what differentiates them from other similar animals might be more superficial than previously thought. Arion and its family shows evidence of the earliest examples of social behavior in decapods. Yes, crabs have friends. Ever see that documentary with the spider crab migration? Those bonds run deep. Shonosaurus popularis is the state fossil of Nevada, a hard-won title considering how many fossils are found there. It's also funny because Shonosaurus lived in the ocean, and, Nevada is mostly desert now. There is no longer a Wikipedia article for Dracorex or Stygimoloch, two dinosaurs that were once considered their own species, but are now only thought to be variations of Pachycephalosaurus. I swear there used to be Wikipedia articles, but they're gone now. Irritator's skull was not only broken during the casting process, but intentionally modified to look cooler by black market dealers. These repeated frustrations are what earned it such a strange and humorous name. Argentinosaurus may be the largest animal to have ever lived, but of course we can't prove that with such a limited fossil record. It was certainly larger than most other living things, considering one of its vertebrae was larger than a whole human. Carnotaurus is only known from a single fossil, but this fossil is almost entirely complete and nearly in one piece. Think of the odds of that. Out of presumably millions of once living animals, only one has ever been found by humans, and that one individual was almost entirely intact. Beelzebufo was not nearly as big as once thought, and might not have grown much larger than modern-day African bullfrogs. A bummer, but it's a reminder of how terrifying African bullfrogs really are, and if frogs get any bigger than they are now, we're all doomed. Aegisuchus had a weird bump on its head that scientists think might have been used for temperature regulation or in mating displays. I like to imagine it was a magical third eye that scanned the stars for encrypted messages from eldritch gods. Dilophosaurus is so much bigger than I had ever thought. I knew it didn't have frills or spat acid, but it never occurred to me that even the Jurassic Park velociraptors were smaller than a real Dilophosaurus. Rhipinomammus is best known for an insanely well-preserved fossil wherein it was killed and buried whilst locked in combat with a dinosaur. Look at this. I would almost be able to be convinced by people who say that someone went out and buried every dinosaur fossil as one elaborate prank on humanity. It looks like a sculpture. Statocosaurus is not only known from the aforementioned Rhipinomammus fossil, but from several other complete fossils, including one that preserved everything from its skin to its cloaca. Yup, even its junk was preserved. The fish that I always knew as that thing you always see Spinosaurus eating in paleoart actually has a name, Atlantocapristes. There's also Oncopristes, which looks pretty similar. Hatzegopteryx inhabited an island in the prehistoric sea where it was likely the largest predator on the land or in the sky. There's a great animated short film made by the YouTuber Cenospire that explores this ecosystem. Barsboldia, like Dracorex, may not have existed as its own species and may instead be a Lambeosaurus fossil. We only have a few vertebrae to even prove its existence, and until we can find a more complete fossil, this taxon remains dubious. Giganotosaurus means giant southern lizard. It's part of a family called Carcharodontosauridae, which means shark-toothed lizards. It was one of the largest terrestrial carnivores the Earth has ever seen. Just let that sink in. A massive reptile with the teeth of a shark that was so large it ate dinosaurs whose heart you could drive a car through. Aurornis might be one of the oldest known bird species, but this designation has not been entirely agreed upon throughout the scientific community. But I mean, look at this. I mean, it looks like a bird, right? Xenoceratops's name does not refer to its physical appearance, but rather the fact that it was an alien in the land where it was found, as no other ceratopsian fossils have been discovered at that site. In fact, despite being called the alien horned face, we actually don't exactly know what its head looked like, as the only fossils we have of it are a few skull fragments. Calligrammatid might look like a butterfly, but butterflies hadn't evolved at the time when this insect lived. Instead, Calligrammatid was a type of lacewing, a group of bugs that still exists today. It did, however, evolve a body plan that would eventually appear in butterflies and moths in a phenomenon known as convergent evolution. Albertodromeus is boring as hell. Not known for being particularly fast, strong, intelligent, or large. It's just kind of a default background dinosaur, like the equivalent of a gopher or a pigeon. A fossil of Dioplosaurus preserves the tendons in its tail, giving us a good idea of just how powerful these clubbed weapons were. Nigel Marvin lied to me. There's absolutely no evidence that Tanystropheus can voluntarily sever its own tail as a defense mechanism. Why did he do that anyway? That always bothered me as a kid. He played it off like it was no big deal, but bro literally went back in time to terrorize a prehistoric animal for our amusement. Dimorphodon was way bigger than I ever thought it was. Growing up, I always ranked it among the little bat-like pterosaurs like Rhamphorhynchus, but it turns out it was bigger than my dog. Kind of terrifying, honestly. There's a really funny story about the naming of Kentrosaurus. The guy who discovered it wanted to name it prickle lizard, or Kentrosaurus. However, there was already another dinosaur named Centrosaurus, which was a ceratopsian and looked completely different. Unknowingly, both scientists changed the names of the animals they discovered, Kentrosaurus becoming Kentorosaurus and Centrosaurus becoming Doryphorosaurus. It was a merry mix-up, and it turns out it had all been for nothing, as both animals are now referred to by their original names. Pancocephalosaurus means panco-headed lizard, named after my dog. This animal has never been discovered, but you also can't prove that it never existed because I refuse to disclose any further information about the nature of its being. And with that tribute to the coolest dinosaur of all time, the month of Maysozoic comes to an end. Like all of these challenges, it went by so damn fast. Looking back on a full month of work, I'm impressed with myself for sticking with it for all 31 days. I'm not just impressed with myself, but with all of the other artists who joined in along with my prompt list. If you are also making artwork for this year's Maysozoic, give yourself a pat on the back and take yourself a well-earned rest. This is not easy, but it's such a good exercise for any artist to try, and I advise all of you who want to improve in your skills as illustrators to try something like this at least once. What is there to gain? Well, other than being a great exercise for developing strong work habits and time management skills, drawing every day helps keep your creative juices flowing. Often, when doing these challenges, I come up with ideas for new worlds and stories based off of my illustrations, like Apoctober. This time, as I drew dinosaurs while listening to Lord of the Rings on tape, I started coming up with an idea for yet another collectible monster world. I don't know if I'm ever going to go anywhere with this, but I like what I have so far. These are some pieces done by other artists following along during Maysozoic. If you're looking for a fun, supportive, and constructive community of artists to work alongside, feel free to join the Subjectively Discord. We have channels for every month-long drawing challenge where you can share your work and get ideas and feedback from other artists just like you. Congratulations to everyone who finished this month. Give them some love in the comments. Well, that'll be it for Maysozoic, but if you enjoyed this video, be sure to let me know by leaving us a like and subscribing if you haven't already. Smogist is coming up, and if you guys like this new format for month-long drawing challenge videos, I'll do it for that challenge as well. If, however, you prefer the old way of doing things, where I just show the time-lapse footage of each piece with some brief commentary over each one, I have some good news for you. A little bonus, if you will, an unscripted presentation of each of my illustrations from this month, going through my thoughts and processes and any other details that I might have left out in the first part of this video. So we started with Caprasuchus Day 1, one of my favorite prehistoric animals to draw because it's one of those prehistoric animals that doesn't feel like a real animal. You know, it's got all of the features that we recognize from modern crocodilians, and yet it stands up on four legs like some crocodiles do today, although now it's thought that it doesn't actually do that. So part of what I really like about it is more fantasy than reality, but it's still a lot of fun to draw. But I also, as fun as it is to draw, I'm like, okay, but I need to throw in some extra insane colors. This is like my favorite color scheme, pink and yellow ombres. So this was like my first one, just going super indulgent with it and kind of setting the tone for the rest of the month in terms of how I want to draw these animals and how I'll be stylizing. And I also came up with the sort of formatting for these, where I come up with a little chart and labels for them. Bulgaria, this was an animal that I didn't know about before this challenge. I was like looking through prehistoric fish because I was like, I want to do some fish. You don't see a lot of paleo art of prehistoric fish, or at least it's not very popular. So I looked up some prehistoric fish, and I love the way prehistoric fish look. This is an ancestor of the ray-finned fish, so like most of the fish that we're familiar with today, this is one of their earliest ancestors, so it looks kind of like the fish that we know and love today, so I gave it kind of like sport fish, mahi-mahi, tuna fish kind of colors that I thought seemed appropriate, though I don't think these animals actually looked like that. Sauropelta ended up becoming one of my favorite dinosaurs because of this month's challenge. Like, I've always sort of overlooked ankylosaurs and nodosaurs just because, I don't know, when I was younger, I didn't like the herbivores, surprisingly, despite them being a vegetarian, I didn't like the herbivores so much. But ankylosaurs are really cool, and especially, I feel like, especially the ones that don't really have the club tail, but rather the insane spikes around the necks. I think those are the nodosaurs. And so I really wanted to celebrate those spines, and I just had fun painting in like these crystalline textures on the spines, which would be like a cool creature in and of itself, just like a crystalline spine nodosaur. And then for the colors of the bodies, of the body, I referenced, other people's paleo art and sort of like the patterns that they give to these kinds of animals. But then of course I gave it like this insane, like cosmic blue and purple color scheme. But there was one specific piece of paleo art of Sauropelta that had a very similar pattern to this, and I just sort of took that and turned it into something a little bit more magical looking, and I gave it the little calligrammatid on its nose. Excuse me. Cryodraken here, I mean, it's pretty obvious why I picked Cryodraken. It's just such an awesome sounding name. I remember reading about this in a National Geographic article, I think. And this was actually pretty easy to draw. It's pretty simple. It's kind of just beak and wings. So I spent a lot less time on the actual underdrawing and more time on the painting, which left me some time to kind of, again, take the liberties with it. I referenced the Black Frost skin line from League of Legends for that throat pouch. I wanted to do something icy, so I changed it. At first I was going for like a more realistic color scheme, and then I was like, no, I want icy. I want it to look like it's frozen and it has like ice powers. I gave it like frost on its wings and stuff. And then the majority of its body was like a blackish color, so I could kind of simplify the hues and stuff in there and spend more of my time on the other details. Saltosaurus. Now I know that its name doesn't have anything to do with actual salt, but I always, I think that mostly just because I love salt so much and I love salty snacks. So like from the beginning, I was like, okay, it has these big osteoderms on its back. Those look like salt crystals. I want to make this thing look like a Cheez-It or a pretzel or both. So I had a lot of fun drawing it. Sauropods are really fun to draw, and I don't draw them enough. And I'm glad I had one sauropod that I was happy with, because I was not happy with Argentinosaurus. But as you can see, I pulled out a Cheez-It here for reference, because I wanted all of those delicious golden brown hues, the orange and the reds and everything. And then I also kind of gave it this like pretzel like baked look, with like that little sheen on it. I referenced food more than I referenced animals when I was painting this one, because I wanted it to look like, I wanted it to look tasty. I wanted it to look like you could dip it in mustard and take a bite out of it. This was another one of my favorites that I did from this month. And then that like final texture was a brush pack that I downloaded. It was just called Scales or something. I bought it from someone's Gumroad. Dinosaurs is one of my favorite dinosaurs. I kind of fell in love with it after that documentary series. I can't remember what it was called. I think it actually wasn't even a series. It was just a movie, but it started Dinosaurs. And also when I started playing this game called Path of Titans with Claire, we both played Dinosaurs as our first dinosaurs. And so it just became like, it was our special dinosaur. So of course I had to include it on the list. But the part of what I love about Dinosaurs is that it's sort of this middle ground in between like the classic kind of terror and splendor that we're used to seeing with dinosaurs, but it's also kind of goofy looking. Before we had found the rest of its body, we just had these giant claws and it seemed so terrifying. But in actuality, it had this sort of goofy duck-like face, and I wanted to indulge both sides of that. Not only because I thought it was funny, but also because ducks have really cool patterns. I referenced a wood duck, which is a duck that actually lives around where I live. I don't see them very often. They're kind of uncommon. But they have really beautiful patterns, and it was really fun to paint and reference these. Referencing real animals, I think, was my favorite part of doing these when I was painting them, because there's so many little different hues and stuff, especially in bird feathers, that you don't really notice unless you're really looking at it. In the head there's green, but it's also brown and red. So I was really happy with this one too. Now, this Hybotus is funny. Hybotus, the name, I actually first became aware of from Final Fantasy XIV Online. There's a mount called Hybotus, and it's a flying shark. Obviously, it's a little more embellished than an actual Hybotus, which actually isn't a shark at all. Also something I learned during this challenge month. And at first I thought I was going to color it like that mount, but then I ended up going with the shiny Garchomp color scheme, because, sharks all kind of have similar colors. So I was like, or shark-like fish, I guess. I know it's not a shark. So I wanted to go crazy with it. I wanted to get some really bright reds. I hadn't done an animal yet that was really just like Power Ranger red, like Saturday morning cartoon red. And I even, speaking of Power Ranger, I gave it these marks and stuff, which were inspired by Garchomp, but like they feel kind of Sentai Power Rangers sort of thing. This was another pretty quick and easy one. These were the ones that, like the fish, I feel like were a lot easier for me to draw because their anatomy was just a little bit easier to stylize, less like joints and articulation and stuff, and kind of just one smooth, streamlined body. I think I might have simplified it too much. I used the blur tool, the blending tool too much here. Don't use the blending tool too much. You lose a lot of those nice little ombres that your brush will actually make. If you just flatten it out, you lose a lot of that, and so I would have changed that if I did it again. Arion, prehistoric decapods, prehistoric crustaceans are always cool. I would have done more prehistoric invertebrates, but the challenge was Maysozoic, so like I wanted to stay in the Mesozoic era, which there were still a lot of cool crustaceans there too. Arion, a very cool looking crustacean. Unfortunately, because I'm drawing it from the side, you can't even see how cool its carapace is from the top. I put it in the video earlier. But I like I said, I made myself more of a challenge by drawing this one from the side because there are like no reference images of this animal from the side. Of course, all of the fossils are preserved where you just see the top down, so it's really hard to draw it from the side. But you know, a paleontologist might critique me on the way this looks from the side, but I feel like I did a good job at adapting the visuals so that you can see it from the side. And then, of course, because, you know, I love crabs, I love golden things, I love golden crabs. You guys know that if you watch this channel. I wanted to go for gold, and then this sort of like blue, gold carapace, but then like a blue underbody, I thought would look really cool. Kind of a color scheme that you don't see too often in animals. You see it a lot in like Demacia, but for animals, you know, this doesn't really exist in real life. But I wanted to have that gold metallic sheen in at least one animal I drew, and I figured an invertebrate would be the best animal to make look golden because they already kind of have an armor-like hard shell. But this is kind of tricky because you can like reference a real animal that has real color schemes, but you know, to try to change that into an impossible texture for an animal is a little tricky. Shonosaurus is such a cool looking animal. I think it's one of those examples of like, you know, we wouldn't think it was weird if it existed today, but it's so unlike anything that we are familiar with today that it seems goofy now. But then if you paint it to look like a dolphin or an orca, which is what I ended up doing here, then it starts to feel a little bit more familiar. And I was referencing common dolphins when I was painting this, but it ended up looking more like an emperor penguin. And Claire's like, you should just name it Penguin. I gave all of them names for the different days of the month, and Claire's like, you gotta name this one just Penguin. And I was like, all right, this one's just Penguin. I really like this color scheme. This is another one of my favorites from this month. I was most happy with this one. This is Dracorex here. Immediately, as soon as I posted this list for people to start working with, people were like, Dracorex isn't, it's not a real dinosaur. It doesn't. I'm like, I know it's not. I just wanted to put it on the list because I always liked it. I thought it was cool. It has a cool name. It has a cool looking head, or at least we thought it did. And it does exist. It's just probably not its own species. It's probably not Dracorex hogwartsia. It's probably just Pachycephalosaurus. Yes, its scientific name was Dracorex hogwartsia, named after J.K. Rowling. So maybe it's for the best that we don't consider it to be its own species anymore. You know, we don't really need to be celebrating J.K. Rowling any more than she's already been glorified. And so I did, however, indulge in the fantasy side of this. I wanted to paint it like a classic fantasy dragon. I gave it this red glow from inside its body as if it was filled with fire. That's a mask layer effect. I think that's the linear burn effect that I'm using with those. Sometimes using those effects, like the masking layers, helps with getting those really saturated colors. That's like a little digital art hack there. This was another one I was very happy with. I like this pose too. I liked him jumping. I wanted to make it look like if he wanted to, he could take off the ground, jump up, and just fly away. I was almost tempted to even give him wings, but I was like, no, I'm not gonna go that crazy. Irritator. This was another dinosaur I learned about from National Geographic when I was very young, and I remember like reading it and like. Up until this point, I had never heard of a prehistoric animal named this way. They usually give them such like insane, you know, glamorous, imposing, godlike names. And then this one is just called Irritator. But I remember reading about the story of how it got its name and how there were so many different repeated frustrations in the process of finding and naming and identifying and preserving these fossils. And it's just a great little story. So I feel like Irritator is a dinosaur that people need to know more about. More people need to know about Irritator and its story and how it's seen throughout the world of paleontology. I also wanted to include some Spinosaurid. I think it's a Spinosaurid. I think that's the family, right? The family that Spinosaurus is a part of. I think they're called the Spinosauridae. I think it's named after Spinosaurus. And I wanted to make them swimming just because I knew at the end of this month I wanted to pose all of the animals together, and I needed some of them to be in the water so that they weren't too crowded all in one composition. So I made Irritator swimming, which I believe it could swim, but you'll have to fact check me on that one. And I gave it a little bandage on its nose there as an homage to its terrible past. Okay, so now we have Argentinosaurus, and yeah, there are a lot of problems with this one. The biggest problem with this one is just because I'm using this square canvas, it was really hard to fit all of the Argentinosaurus in the canvas. Argentinosaurus is very long. It is thought that it held its neck up like that instead of straight forward like some sauropods were thought to have held their neck. But probably not this erect. Probably would have been a little bit more forward. In retrospect, I think I would have just curved its head so I could have made it, I still would have made it look long enough, but it wouldn't have looked so awkward and jammed in there. And then when I started painting it, I was rushing this. I had to leave we were traveling, and I was like, I just need to get this done. And I didn't use any reference when I started coloring it. Like, I referenced the anatomy when I was drawing it, but I didn't use any reference when I was coloring it. Nothing to like give me an idea of like where colors should fall or something. I knew I wanted to do something green because I hadn't done a green animal yet. But I just started improvising, and I just started like putting in these like little swirls and stuff. And I knew as I was drawing, I was like, this doesn't look good. This looks half-assed. This looks rushed. And at this point I was just like, no, I gotta start over. Like I didn't like it. And then I thought, oh, all right. So because I identified, I was like, okay, I know what the problem is. I'm not referencing. And these past ones I've been referencing some sort of real animal to get the color scheme. I was like, oh, what if I referenced a tiny gecko, like a living gecko? That'd be really funny if the largest animal on Earth was colored like one of the smallest reptiles. So I referenced a tiny little gecko, and it kind of helped a little bit. I definitely like this better than what I had. But the underbelly, I gave it this weird counter shading, this yellow underbelly. It was kind of like this webkin that I had, and I don't know. I was so desperate. This is when I start getting confused, and I'm like, oh, what am I gonna do? I don't know how to fix this, and it was too late at this point. But like I said, I learned from it, and I didn't make same mistakes later on. And right away, Carnotaurus, I was like, all right, I'm gonna give myself more time with Carnotaurus. I'm gonna make sure to get some good references. The legs in particular were something that I really had to relearn when drawing dinosaurs. Dinosaur legs, or specifically theropod legs, the legs that really look like bird legs. I've been drawing them in a way that isn't necessarily wrong, but it is wrong. From a scientific perspective, it is wrong. So I had to sort of like break the muscle memory that I had for drawing these legs and relearn them in the feet and everything. But Carnotaurus is such a goofy looking animal. I had to include this on the list. I really love how it just has almost entirely vestigial arms. And for this one, I wanted to do one. I did a dinosaur that was all white, so I was like, let me do a dinosaur that was all black. And I painted in these scales. I know these animals didn't really have big scales like that, but I just liked painting in the scales. But then it wasn't looking good, so then I was like, no, never mind. I was referencing an image of a melanistic caiman, I think. And I found, when you look at a black animal that has this tight, leathery skin, there's a lot of blues, a lot of reds, the way the light hits it from different angles. And, that's what I was saying. Like, you can't just paint it entirely black. There's a lot of color in there. And then I got to the point, I'm painting in like the little scales, just like tiny little highlights and stuff. And as I was doing this, I was like, I could push this a little bit further. Like, yes, black animals, they have colors in them, but what if they had like way more colors than, they in real life? And eventually I'll get to a point where I wanted to give it gold horns too. There's a little accent of color there. Again, a little indulgent. But then I start like, oh, what if I painted in these little highlights as if it had like iridescent multicolored scales that shimmered? I was thinking about Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs when he like has the spray on shoes. I'm like, I kind of want to get that effect. Just like a little subtle, like if this thing was running in the sunlight, it would look like, you know, like a holographic sticker or something. And again, very indulgent. And I kind of wish I spent a little more time on it so it looked a little bit better, because it's a little too subtle, I think. I'm not sure if I'm quite selling it, but I do like the way it came out. Beelzebufo. So Beelzebufo was discovered by Stony Brook University, which is a school that my mom worked for a very long time. So I remember they had this fossil on display, or a cast of the fossil on display inside one of the buildings when I would go to work with my mom when I was younger. And I loved it. I was like, you know, that was the first time I was like at the place where they had discovered a dinosaur, and it was like right around the time, or not a dinosaur, but a prehistoric animal. And it was right around the time they had discovered it. And so I had this like t-shirt with Beelzebufo on it, and I thought it was so cool, this giant frog. But I hadn't really researched it anymore since, you know, 2012, whenever that was. And turns out like newer research, newer theories say it is not quite as big as we had once thought it was, which was a little disappointing to me. I mean, it was still large. It was still a very big frog, and it definitely would try to eat your cat, you know, if given the opportunity, which is terrifying. I think frogs are terrifying. I mean, they can be really cute, but if you are smaller than a frog, that's got to be the most terrifying thing. Just be consumed all in one bite. Like, hopefully you get crushed to death, but probably you're just going to get swallowed alive and into this giant acidic stomach that just digests everything. So I also included the tail hanging out of the mouth there, because I feel like all artwork of Beelzebufo is like, it's eating a dinosaur, and you know, everyone's like, wow, it's that big. It's like, well, it's eating a baby dinosaur, but still. And I made this kind of like a nice, like almost poison dart frog, but like even more fantastical kind of color scheme, because usually they're so drab looking. Aegisuchus, another fun prehistoric crocodilian. I can't remember. I don't think this is part of the same family of crocodiles that's still around today, but obviously it had a lot of the same features. So I referenced an image of a crocodile just kind of like crossing the road somewhere down in Florida. Another thing that I've never really drawn is a crocodile walking up, because crocodiles and you know, members of the crocodile family do walk like this. They can walk up on all fours, like up off the ground, and they can even gallop if they want to. And then for this one, I was like, oh, I haven't done really like a purple dinosaur yet, purple animal. And so I did this like super saturated, very ethereal looking kind of purple, which was a lot of fun to kind of make it underlit when I was referencing this image of the crocodile. The lightest parts of its body were the underside of its body. The light from above it was actually reflecting off of the ground and off of its sort of like yellowed stomach. So I was like, oh, what if it was like this like crazy purple color? And as I was drawing this, like, this looks like it's glowing from the inside, which is even cooler. So I kind of went with that. This is another one I was really happy with, but unfortunately, because a lot of these, you know, I shared them on Instagram, like, they kind of, you kind of can't see all the details of it when it's really small. So I'm glad you guys are seeing it on a big screen now, because all of the details kind of get lost when it's small. Dilophosaurus was always one of my favorite dinosaurs when I was a kid. I had a little stuffed animal Dilophosaurus that I got from my local paleontology museum, and I always loved it. I had it. It was named Ace, and I had like a whole world and story that I made up for it that I played with my sister. And I always liked Dilophosaurus, but I can't believe I never knew how big it actually was. Like, I knew they were large. I knew they were larger than how they appeared in Jurassic Park. I knew they didn't spit acid. I know they didn't have frills. But I didn't know how large it was. And actually, I'm remembering now, I used to go to the Museum of Natural History in New York City a lot when I was a kid. And they have a Dilophosaurus skull there, and it's big. So I don't know why I never made that connection. I was like, okay, yeah, not only is this bigger than the one in Jurassic Park, but it's like much bigger. Yeah, it's like larger than most, you know, popular theropods, which is kind of scary, because a part of the reason I always liked it is because I just imagined it being smaller. But if you look up artwork of Dilophosaurus now, and this is another thing I did, like, they give them these kind of proto feathers where it kind of looks like it's got this almost like hog, like wild hog bristles and stuff. And I was like, oh, that really makes it look even more feral and terrifying. So I kind of leaned into that. I did give it very bright saturated colors, and the orange crests, because the little stuffed animal I had orange crests. I wanted to throw in the orange crest as a nod to my little toy Ace. I still have that somewhere, I think. I think I still have it. So I wanted to include at least one mammal because I was trying to cover all the bases. I had a lot of reptiles, obviously, a lot of dinosaurs, but I also wanted to throw in some mammals and some invertebrates, even though, you know, most people don't really think about them when they think about paleontology, especially in the Mesozoic, where dinosaurs ruled, right? But I found out about Rypenomammus, which was not an animal that I had known about before, from that insane fossil where it's locked in battle with Psittacosaurus, and I find that so cool. I'm using the hairbrush. This is another one of the brushes that Claire designed. It's great for painting hair textures. It saves you a lot of time, and it looks really cool. And you can layer different colors, which gets you these cool kinds of like animal-looking shades. I painted this one kind of to look like the Flash, just because I had it in this fast running pose, but it was also referencing Tasmanian devils and Tasmanian tigers, just because when a lot of people recreate these animals, that's sort of how they paint them. But I wanted to get that saturated red and yellow, those impossible colors that I like to include in there. But more or less, the patterns were inspired by Tasmanian devils. If you're familiar with those animals look like, I mean, that's obvious. That's pretty clear. That's what I was referencing here. I think I overdid it with the brushes a little bit on here. I think I probably could have decided to stylize the hair a little bit more, or use the hair brush texture a little bit more. But I was pleased with this one. I don't draw mammals a lot, and this came out okay. And then the next day, I did Psittacosaurus because, you know, I wanted to make it look like it was being chased by Rypenomammus. Even though that fossil that probably wasn't trying to like hunt the Psittacosaurus, was probably looking to eat one of its babies or something. But this is another very strange animal. This animal is part of the Ceratopsian family, so like Triceratops and stuff. This is a very old member of that family, and it looks so different, obviously. It's another dinosaur type that I didn't draw that often as a kid, so this was kind of like heavily referenced, and I think it shows. Like, I think you can tell how much I referenced this, and, you know, we have such clear reference for this animal because we have such good fossil remains of it. It's a weird looking thing, but I like it. So Atlantocapristes, another animal that I was aware of, but I never really gave any thought to, which is a shame, because, like, if this was a fish that was alive today, we would think, wow, this is a cool looking fish. And we do have saw-nosed fish that look pretty similar to this, but this one's like 20 feet long. But you always think of it as just the thing that Spinosaurus eats, or at least that's how I always thought of it. So I wanted to make it feel more like a main character. I gave it these bright green colors. Again, I didn't have a lot of green animals so far on my repertoire for this month, so I wanted to make it green, and I like sort of a green and pink color scheme, so I was like, oh, I'll do this kind of fun, like spring kind of color scheme. Makes absolutely no sense for this animal, but again, I'm abusing the blend tool. You can see me abusing it here. Like, I wanted it to look smooth, but you just lose a lot of the see, now I realize that I'm like painting in. I'm like, I need to bring back some of that texture that I was creating with the brush. Like, I'm losing that here, so I sort of like paint in some definitions of like different parts of where the bone would stick through the skin and stuff, and then I add in the little pink accents and details in the colors there. I would go back and redo that a little bit. I'm happy with like 69% of this piece. That is a legitimate, like, that's how I just like rationalized it in my head. I promise I wasn't trying to make a joke there, but literally like almost 70% of this I'm happy with. A few things I think I rushed a little bit. The head looks good. I also like how I ended up making it look like it was smiling. This is Hatzegopteryx. Another, you know, I thought pterosaurs were so cool when I was a kid, especially as darkids, just because, like, I mean, look at this thing. Like, there's literally nothing like this around anymore. Like, dinosaurs, especially theropods, we can kind of look at birds and be like, yeah, I see the resemblance there. And maybe some people would look at this and see the resemblance with a bird, you know, just because it has wings and a beak. But, like, I look at these things and I'm like, what the heck? Like, imagine living with these things. However, I did end up painting it like a turkey, just because I gave it this big waddle when I was drawing it. I imagined it with like this big wrinkly neck skin. People draw these all kinds of different ways, either with like really big heads with a lot of muscle or fur, or like really ugly naked heads. I feel like it makes sense that it would have a naked head, considering it's like going to be like stabbing things and getting blood all over its face with its giant beak. And just because I think turkeys are ugly in a really beautiful way, in America, at least, we think of turkeys as just like food. But I always thought they were cool looking animals. So I like to celebrate them whenever I can. And this was, I think, the best example of the use of the different brushes that we have at play, layering different hues. Like a turkey's head, you think, oh, it's just blue and red, but there's so many. When I was looking at these pictures, there's so many different colors in there: grays and purples and reds and browns. And the best way to get that is to layer low opacity brushes and to use those low opacity brushes and layer those colors over each other. And then you can go in and you can add in more refined details like the wrinkles in the skins and the little bumps and stuff. But this was a lot of fun to paint. It can get frustrating painting details sometimes, but it can also get really hypnotic. It's like meditative, really focusing on those little details and being deep inside the little details, and then zooming out and realizing like, wow, this all came together really well. The other fun thing about painting it like a turkey was that like the rest of its body was kind of dark, and I could spend a lot of the time on the head and less time on the rest of the body. I can kind of sort of, I put in like the details of the wrinkles of the wing membranes and stuff, and like the little bit of fur or feathers or whatever it would be. But then the rest of it, I could kind of just paint dark and just celebrate that big ugly head that people kept saying looked like a cassowary. It's like, no, it's a turkey, but yeah, it does look like a cassowary. Barsboldia is another dinosaur I learned about from Path of Titans, actually. What I didn't know about it was that, like I said, it's a dubious taxon. It's only known from like a couple of vertebrae, I think. And some scientists believe it's not its own species. It's an Alambiasaurus. But again, these were dinosaurs that I sort of overlooked when I was younger because, I don't know, I just didn't like the herbivores when I was a kid. But they have such cool bodies. It's similar to the large herbivores that we used to seeing today, with these big sturdy backs and these kind of strangely thin legs they don't look like they would support so much weight, but nonetheless, it makes these really interesting shapes that are really fun to draw, and I think, again, would make for some really cool fictional creatures, drawing things with these very thin, nimble-looking legs and such a big, beefy body. Because this is a dinosaur that my wife likes a lot, I wanted to use colors that she liked as well. I also really like these colors, again, pink and green and blue. Great combination of colors. And I, again, was referencing maybe the Barsboldia from Path of Titans and the color scheme that they give it in Path of Titans, but I swapped out the more realistic, scientifically plausible colors for some colors that I found just like fun and bright and colorful and pretty. I think when I asked people what we should name this one, a lot of people said Barbie because Barsboldia, but also it's pink. I went with Malibu. Someone suggested Malibu. I like that more. A little bit more subtle, a little bit more of a catch the reference kind of moment. Giganotosaurus, I've always been away. Like, this was the kind of dinosaur that I thought was awesome when I was a kid, because I was like, yeah, big carnivore. This is a boy dinosaur. And it's like, yeah, like one of the largest carnivores that we're aware of. I found out that it's larger, scale, it's larger than a T-Rex, height and lengthwise, but it was actually lighter than T-Rex. Which to me is actually more terrifying, because the idea of a dinosaur that's that large but could potentially move faster and maybe be more nimble and agile, it was like the worst. It's like the worst combination in terms of like something that wants to eat you. But to sort of contrast how terrifying this dinosaur was, I was like, let me paint it like Barney. I was going back and forth this whole month, like, should I do a Barney color scheme for any of these dinosaurs? And I didn't find, like, the moment didn't arise up until this point. And then I was like, this motherfucker's gonna be purple. I'm gonna give this thing, purple with neon green spots. I started with, like, again, referencing like real color patterns, but again, swapping them out for like, if dinosaurs were this color, that'd be awesome. It's almost entirely impossible that they were. It would be really funny if we found out Giganotosaurus was actually bright purple with green spots on it. But I don't know, it's just fun. Either way, it's fun. I like doing that, sort of softening how terrifying it would be by coloring it like Barney. This is a Rornus. I wanted to put in some very bird-like dinosaurs. In fact, I believe, based on the very limited research I did, that this particular animal is thought by some to be one of the oldest birds, like Archaeopteryx. Birds are dinosaurs. Not all dinosaurs are birds, but Orornis may well have been the first bird. This would then evolve into the birds that we're familiar with today. So, of course, I painted it like a bird that we are familiar with today. Blue jay, another bird that lives around here, in Rhode Island where I live. And, just such a striking, beautiful color scheme. I don't know. Some bird nerd tell me, why are they colored like this? Like, there are really no birds in this area that are so vivid and brightly colored like the blue jay is. And I have no idea what advantage that gives them. I know they're corvids. I know corvids have like black, blue, and white usually in their plumage, but it's so striking to me. Cardinals and blue jays, they're like the only two brightly colored birds around where I live. And it's really fun. Again, I actually used Claire's hair brush pack again for this one, even though it doesn't have hair. Getting those really fine feathers on its chest, the hairbrush made that a lot easier. And again, even when something, you think it's white, blue jays have like a white chest, but it's not entirely white, right? It's got a lot of different hues within that white, a lot of yellow, a lot of blue, a lot of gray, and then the brightest parts of it you can use maybe pure white in very sparing spots. But I was very happy with the way this one came out. Xenoceratops. I had to include at least one more ceratopsian. In fact, I'm a little disappointed I didn't add more. It's just this one and Psittacosaurus. But I had never heard of Xenoceratops before. I was looking through different kinds of ceratopsians, and the name Xenoceratops really grabbed me. And I was referencing a lot of images of Xenoceratops, existing paleo art. But then I found out that its skull, that we haven't found a complete skull of this animal. So I was a little disappointed in myself because I was like, I could have made this skull a lot more crazy. And technically no one could have argued with me. I should have given it like weird, like curled horns or something. Because when I colored it, I wanted to give it like, I was thinking Alienware, like the laptops, like black, silver, and bright green. But then I was also thinking, of course, of like xenomorphs. And I think we ended up naming this Sigourney. I think that's the name that we gave this. But this is, this is another one that I really liked. And it's so simple. I didn't spend a ton of time. The body is mostly black, so I spent a lot of time more on the head, and just those bright accent colors on the head. It looks really nice. I should do more character designs like that. Just a really simple color scheme. Calligrammatid, again, I wanted to include some arthropods, some invertebrates. Calligrammatid, when I found it, I thought was a prehistoric butterfly, but then I found out that butterflies hadn't existed at that point. They hadn't yet evolved. So this was a type of lacewing fly, which are actually some of the creepiest looking bugs that I think are around today. Lacewings are really weird. They include some really weird looking animals. But I wanted to draw it anyway, just because, it's a good example of how strange but familiar life was in the Jurassic period. Obviously, they weren't these colors. I was actually referencing a boss from Final Fantasy XIV, more Final Fantasy influence here. But I wanted to make those wings gorgeous. They probably weren't gorgeous. We do know that, I think they're, because they're preserved in amber, I think we know that they had eye spots, and which is really cool, because it's like, oh, they've evolved to sort of mimic the shape of dinosaur eye spots. So this is like the closest we can get to seeing what a dinosaur eye actually looked like, which I think is really cool. Oh my god. Okay, so now Alberta Dromius, I wanted to do at least one dinosaur that was just boring, kind of challenge myself. Because, there are a lot of cool dinosaurs, some cool dinosaurs that people have never heard of, some cool dinosaurs that everyone knows of because they look cool. But Alberta Dromius is just so, and all of the paleo art I found of it, the existing paleo art of it, was they didn't try to make it look cool at all. It was just so drab looking. And I don't know if this animal actually had feathers. I don't know if anyone knows for a fact if it actually had feathers. But I was like, this is too boring. I need to paint this like a beautiful animal. And again, I was thinking of birds that live around where I live that I find really beautiful. And pheasants, I think, are some of the most beautiful animals that we have here in the Northeast. And so I was like, I can make this thing look cool. It's still kind of boring. It's only cool because it's painted like a pheasant. But I was proud of myself. I was like, okay, I changed this from something I didn't care about at all to something I actually find pretty cute. And then another ankylosaur, another big armored guy. Again, I was really getting into these, and I really like drawing their bodies, how kind of slender their necks and their tails are, but then how big and bulky their bodies are. This was the only one where I didn't just use my underdrawing as the final lines. A lot of times I do that. I prefer to do that. I'm not sure why. I think I just wanted to try. I was like, just once, do an underdrawing and then draw over it with a separate set of lines. And honestly, the result doesn't look that different. I don't think you can even tell that that's what I did. I painted this one like a cosmic brownie. As I was drawing in all of its little osteoderms and the spines on its back, I was like, this kind of look like little chocolate chips. I want to color this thing like a cosmic brownie. I like coloring them to look like treats and food and snacks and stuff. And so I ended up referencing brownies, again, kind of like with the Saltosaurus. I referenced food more than I referenced actual animals when I was drawing this. But back to how much I love Ankylosaurs. If you saw like my rough drafts for Elder Days, which is what I'm thinking about calling the working title for this prehistoric themed collectible monster game, like the first thing I came up with is like, I want to come up with some kind of cool Ankylosaur looking creature. Because they kind of have this ancient majesty to the way they look. So the first characters I'm designing are those like grass mage and plant Ankylosaurs. So that's where this took me. I was like, I don't know. I just sort of got this renewed appreciation for these kinds of animals. And again, there's another kind of animal that we don't really have anything that looks like this today. We have some things that have some similar features, but there's nothing like Ankylosaurs anymore. So I want to celebrate them a little bit more. Tanystropheus was at the front of my mind because people brought it up in the That's Not How You Draw Dinosaurs video, the fake, quote, water dinosaur, unquote, that I made up. People were like, oh, it kind of looks like Tanystropheus. And I was like, I remember Tanystropheus. I had a toy of one when I was a kid, and I thought it was wrong. I was like, there's no way that its neck is this long. But no, not only is its neck that long, but we know its neck is that long. We found all of the vertebrae. It was that big. It probably couldn't bend its neck like this because it had so few vertebrae in its neck. But again, I had to fit it in the canvas, and I didn't want to do the same thing that I did with Argentinosaurus. So I learned, and I like this one a lot more. It's an impossible looking shape that it's bending its neck this way, but it looks a lot better than I think you would all agree that this piece of artwork looks better than my Argentinosaurus. The other thing I was completely misinformed about, I put this on the final piece. It was like, oh, its tail can pop off. And I was like, where did I come up with that? And then I remembered someone actually pointed out in the comic, they were like, in the comments of this post when I posted it, they were like, oh yeah, no, Sea Monsters made that up. It can't actually pop its tail off. And I was like, oh, okay, they just lied to me in a documentary. Dimorphodon, I should have done more pterosaurs. Honestly, I don't know why I didn't do more pterosaurs. I love pterosaurs. Dimorphodon is a really cool one. I learned drawing this and it was a lot bigger than I thought it was. I don't know why I always assumed it was small when I was a kid. I guess I don't remember ever seeing it in a documentary to give me a sense of scale, but I just assumed it was smaller. And when I painted in the feathers, I was referencing a blue-footed booby, and what I did was I created another layer and I just kind of painted in shapes over the darkest parts of the body that I toned the whole body with this dark color first, and then I just sort of painted these sort of triangles to give the idea of like bent feathers, because if you looked at the neck of an animal with these feathers, or fur in this case, you know, it sort of bends and wrinkles and you get these little dark spots that indicate where the feathers are kind of collapsing on themselves. And then I, you know, gave it the blue skin for the head and the feet and the tail, a little blue-footed booby coloration there. Made it cuter than Dimorphodon usually looks. Kentrosaurus, I waited to the second to last day to add any stegosaur. I don't know why I didn't put another stegosaur in here. Again, very cool. I think I like Ankylosaurs more. You know, they're kind of similar in their evolutionary adaptations. But I always thought Kentrosaurus was one of the coolest stegosaurs just because it was like, I don't know, like Stegosaurus was like, okay, that's the default one. And then Kentrosaurus was just like a little cooler because instead of the plates running all the way down its back, it just has a bunch of spikes halfway down. And then it has the spike coming out of its shoulder, which I actually forgot to draw. You'll see, like, it took me a while to remember. I was like, oh, I forgot. Probably there, now I included it. But like, it's like probably the most iconic part of Kentrosaurus is the giant spike that comes out of its shoulder. And I almost forgot to include it. This was almost like a realistic a plausible color scheme, the sort of like brown and green. I kind of was like forcing myself to do like these kind of earthy colors, but I was like, that's so boring. I don't want to just make it. So I was like, I'm gonna give it bright green spines and plates down its back. Like, I just need to make this look crazy and fantastical. It was too close to something that could have actually existed. And then finally, the last day, I really didn't know what I was going to do for the prompt, just the coolest dinosaur. That was day 31's prompt, was just the coolest dinosaur. So I didn't know what I was going to do, and I went back and forth. At first, I was going to do a monster, a creature from Magic the Gathering, Gashoth. But then I was like, nah, I like adding in like a Panko reference. Panko is my dog. And I was like, I do that some of my other months with Kaijun. I did that. I think with the Dragon Challenge, I did a Panko Dragon. So like, I'm going to make up a dinosaur. I'm going to make it Pankocephalosaurus, the Panko-headed lizard. And it's really interesting trying to include your favorite features of your dog into an animal that is just so different from your dog physically. It mostly just came down to the colors. My dog is almost entirely white with a couple brindle spots on her face and on her back. But she also has such her pink belly, so I wanted to paint in that pink belly. And she's really wrinkly. Panko's really wrinkly. She's a pit bull staffy mix, and she is just so wrinkly. So I wanted to make sure to give her a big wrinkly neck. No feathers, because she's just, I wanted to have that kind of naked skin. She doesn't even look like, my dog doesn't even look like she has fur. She's just big and wrinkly. And, I painted in, again, using some of the brushes that Claire has there to get that kind of brindle kind of pattern. And that was it. That was all 31 days of dinosaurs. I want to say 31 days of dinosaurs. It's not. A lot of them weren't dinosaurs. In fact, how many? I feel like fewer of these. I'm pausing this for a second. So it might be like 50-50 dinosaurs, not dinosaurs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Someone, I'm not counting this right now. Someone count them and see. I wanted to make sure I had as many animals that weren't dinosaurs as animals that were dinosaurs. I think there are probably a few more dinosaurs than not dinosaurs. But I did a good job at giving us a variety of species. And that's it. Holy shit. I'm talking for like a half hour straight and completely unscripted. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was a really fun challenge. And like I said, let me know if you like this new format of doing the monthly drawing challenge videos. And I'll do Smogus like this too. It's a lot easier for me to make them instead of doing one video a week every week, which is a lot of work on top of doing all of this artwork as well. So if you guys like this, that'd be great for me because I think this is a much better way of making these videos. Thanks again for watching, guys. I almost said mermaid again. Happy Maysozoic. And I'll see you in the next video.